In this video, I'll briefly review the use of zeros in decimal numbers and rounding. So in decimal numbers, a leading zero is the zero that precedes the decimal. Leading zeros should always be used in your work and in the responses that you provide on examinations and quizzes. The reason this is important is you could see if I rewrote this 0.15 without the leading zero, someone could easily misinterpret that as 15 instead of 0.15. So the failure to use leading zeros is one source of medication errors that can be very dangerous. For this reason, we are always going to be using leading zeros, and any answers containing decimals that lack the leading zeros would be marked incorrect. The other type of zeros in decimal numbers are trailing zeros. These would be zeros that follow the decimal place, so to the right of the decimal place. The use of trailing zeros is another possible source of medication errors for the same reason. You could see that I could write something, write that 1.00 out, and that could be misinterpreted by someone as meaning 100 rather than 1. Therefore, trailing zeros should not be used unless you have rounding or significant figure instructions stated that require their use. And we'll take a look at an example of this in a minute. But do not use trailing zeros unless the instructions for rounding require you to use them. So now we'll briefly review rounding as a refresher. There are several different ways in which you may be instructed to round your answers in the different courses that you take. So we'll run through some of the more common examples of those. So in this case, we're going to round the 2364.781 to the nearest. In the first example, we are rounding to the nearest whole number. So that basically means we don't want any digits following the decimal point, so we will round up or down based on the value immediately to the right of the decimal point. So in this case, since we have a 7, we are going to round up, so our whole number would be 2365. If we are asked to round that number to the nearest 10, that we'll be focusing on that portion there, the 64. So in this case, we would round this to 60. Remember, 5 and above we round up. Anything below 5 would round down. So 2360 would be rounded to the nearest 10th, or 10. Nearest 100, in this case, we would round that up to 2400. And then lastly, we can take a look, and if it's asking for the nearest 1000, 364 is less than 500, so this would round to 2000. So that's how you would round some of the larger numbers. You'll probably have more examples of rounding smaller numbers, so we'll take a look at some different examples of rounding these smaller numbers down. So in these examples, we want to round this 10.69472 to the nearest, and again, we'll start with whole number. So in this case, right to the right of the decimal, we have this 6. So if we want to round this to the nearest whole number, that would be 11. We would round up. The nearest tenth, that's going one position to the right of the decimal place, so we are interested in rounding that position there. So we would have 10.7, using the 9 to round that 6 up. The nearest hundredth, again, we're just going to keep going one position further to the right of the decimal place. So in the case of a hundredth, that would be 10.69. And then for thousandth, we're going to go one more position out. So 10.695. So that's how we do that. Most people don't have trouble with understanding that if the value is 5 or higher, you round up. If it's below, you round down. It seems that there's more issues with people not understanding what exactly is meant by these terms. The other way you could see small number rounding expressed is with reference to the decimal place. So in this case, we have another small number, the 0.87014. Notice that I did include the leading 0. So if we wanted to round this to the nearest whole number, we have a 0.87 to the right, immediately to the right of the decimal place. Our closest whole number would be 1. If we wanted one decimal place, this is talking about going to the right of the decimal. So to round this to one decimal place, we would get 0.9, again using our leading 0. 2 decimal places would be 0.87, and 3 decimal places 0.870. So this is an example of a case where you would include a trailing 0 if you were specifically instructed to round to 3 decimal places. If that instruction wasn't made, then you would not use the trailing 0. 1 decimal place then is the same as rounding to the 10th, 2 decimal places, 100th, and 3 decimal place, thousandths. So that wraps up our review or refresher on the use of leading and trailing zeros and rounding.